Welcome to Charts Today, Asia Pacific. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Tuesday, the 16th of October, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at just the market in general, currencies. The US dollar has been weak the last week, just starting to regain a little bit of strength, but still bearish in the short term. A downside target of 2% not yet activated on this 60-minute chart. This is the long-term view, the weekly, the 1% point and figure chart with price targets, the daily, the half percent point and figure chart, the 60-minute, and the 60-minute point and figure chart. So this is my long term, my medium term, and my short term views, so I can align all of those views together. So the dollar is looking still a little bit weak short term. Taking a look at the euro, we see here that the euro has gained some strength. Japanese yen has been strong against the dollar. We see the dollar weakening against the yen, but flattening out again this morning. Dollar actually making a long-term transition against the yen and has been bullish in the medium term. We do have upside targets some 10% higher, but also a downside target of some 2% lower. So looks like we might fall before we rise. Sterling in the UK, pound is actually below the cloud on the short-term chart. And so just trying to make a medium-term transition against the US dollar, but just still struggling. We do have quite a few upside targets though, so it looks like sterling may well break through, a lot depending on Brexit, of course. And if we look at sterling against the euro, we see that sterling has been weak the last few days. Taking a look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin had a big jump yesterday, actually jumped and then pulled right back. Long term, the chart's still looking pretty weak, and we do have quite a few downside targets here on the long-term chart. One as low as 29% lower, 7% lower, 31% lower. So it really does look like Bitcoin could fall further. And whilst this is looking better short-term, the long and medium-term picture is not so good. Taking a look at the US markets, we were fairly mixed yesterday, but mostly down. The futures this morning, we've got the Nasdaq future up 0.6%, so it does look like the US markets will open higher today, and the European futures are fairly flat. The FTSE future a little unchanged, and the DAX index also little changed. Taking a look at the Japanese market, we see here up some 0.83%. Hang Seng also weaker, and the S&P composite weaker. Crude oil, Brent crude looking just a little bit weaker this morning, sitting at $80.69, and we can see here that short term we're still bearish. We have got a downside target to 78.81, but medium and long term the charts do look good with good upside targets, so still looking pretty good there. WTI, the other oil product, also looking higher as well. Gold has had a resurgence yesterday, had a very strong rise, making 3-month highs. Looking to try and make a medium-term transition to bullish, and we do have this upside target now to $1,302, so that's quite key. US 10-year yields also just have been bearish, sitting back at that 3.17%, but medium and long term still look very bullish indeed. 3.38% is the medium-term target, and 3.83% is the long-term target. So the chart's pricing in further rises. Taking a look at the stocks in these markets, we start by looking at, we see yes overnight the S&P 500 was some 0.5% lower. The Nasdaq was still quite heavily down, some 1.2%. And we can see some of the Latin American indices were up. The VIX volatility, quite interestingly, has moved all over the place in the last few weeks, of course, with this turmoil. Europe, the stock 600 was up slightly, but generally speaking, we saw the markets lower. This is all data from Yahoo Finance, by the way. So we see here this morning the Shanghai composite is lower. The really big worry on Chinese stocks is these downside targets activated. We've got downside targets of 3%, 4%, 6%, 36%, and 43% all activated. And if you look at the Chinese market relative to the Dow Jones, again, this data all from Yahoo Finance, we're seeing here we're some 25% down this year. So Chinese stocks continue to fall. That's the big issue really in the market at the moment. The Aussie market actually up 0.5%, so looking a little bit stronger this morning, but medium and long term still pretty weak. We have got good upside targets on the long-term charts, but again has underperformed the US market some 6% this year. The Sensex in India again has improved about 0.5% overnight, but still looking bearish on that medium-term chart. And if we take a look at the Nikkei, we see here the Nikkei has come back to bounce right on support. The weak yen, stronger yen hasn't really helped the market there, and we're just seeing that there with some 5% under the US performance as well. And taking a look at the Nifty, back to India, we're seeing here that same picture, fairly bearish downside. So let's take a look at the individual stocks. First of all, just taking a quick look at the Nasdaq. Stocks such as Apple were down some 2%, still looking pretty bullish. Amazon, also this is the weekly, remember the daily. So Amazon is just holding on to its gains there. Not all stocks looking great though. Google still looking a little bit worrying on that medium-term chart. If we look at some of the other stocks in the news, Tesla was actually up 0.3%, but still looking pretty bearish. 250 is a critical level for Tesla. We break through that and we break to new 18-month lows, and we've got quite a few downside targets here for Tesla, so it does look a little bit worrying for them. Taking a look at Netflix, again just struggling with that medium-term chart. Has outperformed the market very strongly with its sharp rise at the start of the year, but still looking a little bit worrying on that medium-term picture. And Microsoft, the sad news, Steve Allen died overnight, but still the stock looking very strong indeed and having outperformed the market some 23% this year. Moving on to Australian stocks, we start there first, and generally speaking, I like to look at the worst and best performers. So we see here Washington Soul Pattinson as the strongest performer, still looking like an amazing year, having outperformed the US market, the Dow, by 50%. Saracen Minerals, we're seeing here again looking pretty strong. All of the strong performers tend to be the bullish ones. Fairfax Media will be interesting to see here. Bearish in the short term, just having a recovery there on yesterday, some 3% up, but looking a lot less good. It's 13% underperformance on the Dow. And if we look at the worst performers, again, Welsh Insurance was lower and looking bearish, and we see this all the time, that the less good performers tend to be sitting in the bearish camp. Taking a look at China, of course, we mentioned that we were quite worried about the Chinese stock market. Bank of Shanghai not looking so bad here, but bearish on that weekly chart, which is a worry. We do have some upside targets, but downward pressure and resistance there. Taking a look at some of the other banks particularly a concern, but here's PetroChina looking good on that oil price, of course. Bank of Communications China looking not so bad on but bearish on the medium and long-term charts, having performed quite well. Still updating there in that market. Again, this is all coming from Yahoo. Taking a look at some of the other stocks, Poly Real Estate Group, we're seeing just bearish charts pretty well everywhere we look on China, and that is one of the big concerns. We're just below the chart all the time. So taking a look at the Hong Kong market, best performers, Sunny Optical, but again turning bearish. So even though we're seeing strong performances, the charts are turning bearish. WH Group, we're seeing here bearish below the chart. Nearly all of these charts looking pretty bearish, so it doesn't bode well for Asian stocks. Taking a look at India, ICI Bank, the best performer, up 2.29%, and this does look quite strong. We're seeing the strong performers again coming near the top. Bearish there on Bharati, Infratrail, and oil and gas India. We're seeing here a relief rally today, but actually still bearish on the charts. Tata Steel, we're seeing here holding on to its bullish position. Taking a look at the bearish stocks in India, we see India bulls housing down some 2.75%, looking bearish here. ITC looking bearish. A lot of these stocks reflecting the index. Wipro actually looking stronger, so IT stocks not so bad. Banking stocks we're seeing across the board tending to look medium-term bearish. We do have a long-term trend still in train, but not looking great. This is my on-balance volume chart. This is my relative strength to the Dow Jones, and these charts just track where I click around, so that's quite cool. Last of all, look at Japan, and if we look at Japanese stocks, we see Toho is strong, looking like taking a medium-term transition here on the cloud. If we look at Nippon Telegraph, we can see here also bearish on that short, the medium-term chart. And the worst performance in Tokyo, Terumo, is actually looking bullish on the charts, but just the worst performer today. Sumitomo Osaka Cement, for example, looking there, and then Crude Holdings also lower today, but holding on to its bull trend. So we're seeing something of counter trend moves there. That's it for today. Remember, if you want to track any of these stocks yourself, just download Updata, run the light version on these markets. That's it for now. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.